Welcome to Pabo.com, the podcast. Discover your sexual journey with Nynke Nijman.
Antonio and Anne kept on getting into conflict every time they came across it. How should they handle the sexual education of their two children? Antonio comes from a family where sex was the subject of many conversations. His father always had a younger mistress, and he suspects his mom of having a lover too. His younger sister became a mom at the age of 18, and even after the birth of her daughter, she kept on maintaining a very active sex life. Within their family, sexuality clearly was something you could and should embrace. You were allowed to enjoy it and to be curious about it. Anne, on the other hand, comes from a family that barely spoke about sexuality. She rarely saw some form of intimacy between her parents. She discovered her own sexuality with the knowledge she gained during the sex education at school. And to be quite honest, she thought she managed just fine. Anne notices she has a huge judgment about the way they dealt with sexuality at Antonio's. She even thinks that his sister wouldn't have been a teenage mom if their parents wouldn't have flaunted their own sexuality in front of their children. And that is why Anne feels as if they should handle things differently with their own children. Antonio and herself wouldn't have to talk about it with their children proactively. If they would ask a question, they could get into the conversation, but only to a certain degree. The rest they would learn at school during biology or experience as grown-ups. Antonio couldn't disagree more on this approach. He saw it as his duty and obligation to teach his children more than just that. Looking back on his own childhood, it might have been a bit too open, but as a consequence of it, he is very well in touch with his sexual self. And this is exactly why Antonio and Anne have been struggling about this matter for the last 12 years. 12 years ago, it didn't seem like a very big issue. They didn't have any children then. But by now, their children are 11 and 9 years old. And the only message those children have received up until now about sexuality was a negative one. Apparently, sexuality is something complicated that causes distress between their parents. But do Antonio and Anne realize that they have been given clear messages about sex to their children for years now? Sexual education lies within the most subtle messages and the smallest acts of behavior. It lies within the implicit responses or notions. Every time an answer to a question is denied, or a conflict happens between parents in trying to come to a response, you send a message. And meanwhile, Antonio and Anne's kids have no clue what to do or what to think of sex, as far as they come across it. Apparently, sex was a bad thing, causing a lot of conflict between their parents. It seems to me that Anne and Antonio hadn't anticipated for this to happen every time they mentioned the sexual education of their children. And even so, this is the sense for sexuality they developed with their children.